Hey everyone, this is Jack from the Cardboard Herald, and I have finished Platypus Con 2022. That is the local gaming convention here in Juneau, the capital of Alaska. It is our largest gaming convention, and for regional gaming cons, it's actually pretty sizable, except for, of course, this was a quarantine year, but I do want to put out there that I was very impressed with all of the safety measures at the con. It was mandatory vax. It was always wear your mask. It was checking to make sure that you'd already passed the mandatory vax test anytime you re-entered the con. There were lots of precautions. There was tons of hand sanitizer dispensers that required no touch whatsoever in order to dispense that hand sanitizer everywhere. I felt perfectly safe, and I had a great time playing tons of games, which brings me to what we're talking about today, which is rapid reviews of every single new-to-me game that I played at the con this year. I got to play a lot of games that I'd already played, and I had a great time doing them, but this is exclusively talking about the games that I got a chance to play for the first time here at this con, barring any prototypes that I played, which I actually got to play quite a few. So without further ado, let's kick this off. These are in no particular order whatsoever, except for I'm going to start with a high point and I'm going to end with a high point. And the first game that I'm going to start with is hard for me to pronounce. It's Nidavellir. You know, the dwarf realm from Norse mythology. Bottom line, this is a drafting game in which you're drafting different dwarf clansmen in order to get points and have the greatest dwarf community. And I was thoroughly impressed. Not only did it have the usual set collection kind of stuff that you expect out of set collection games, but the theme was really well integrated, and there was an incentive to diversify in that you'd get these hero dwarves, which had their own scoring mechanisms or could contribute heavily to any of the 5 different types of suits that you normally would be trying to collect. Of course, one of the biggest, coolest, freshest things about the game is this coin system where you have an equal loadout to other players of 5 coins that you can use to bid on different cards or different groupings of cards to have the first opportunity to draft. However, if you use your 0 coin as a drafting coin, meaning essentially you're going to go last, you can upgrade the 2 coins that you didn't end up using that round and making them stronger and more powerful and have more bidding power, which is really cool. Really impressed with this game. It was more engaging and mechanically satisfying than something like Seven Wonders, and the set collection itself was just as strong. So to me, it's like an overall upgrade to the classic drafting thing. I could easily see adding this to my collection, and Seven Wonders is something that I've already gotten rid of in the past. So yeah, way impressed with this game. Now on Sunday, I had a chance to play Let's Make a Bus Route, which is a Japanese game here now released in English, but originally from Japan, as is so hot right now. And this is a flip and write game in which all players are making changes on a dry erase central board representing the city. And you're drawing your bus route based off of the color cards that come up, and every player has a different corresponding movement pattern based off of the different colors. So my purple is different than your purple, but ultimately we have all the same shapes. You collect things as you go about. You collect kids, which are going to drop off at schools. You're trying to get photograph sites. There's all kinds of things that you can do. It's very simple in that regard, but the real hink of the game is that you are going to have to lose points or potentially lose more points if you are overlapping with other people's routes, so thereby making the city more congested. It was a really great mechanism to integrate player interaction into a flip and write. I loved the central board. I loved the really bureaucratic theme. Like, city planning is something that I'm all about. I can't think of a more Japanese theme than planning out the bus routes in a city, and yet it was charming, it was beautiful, it was reserved. It's one of the best flip and writes that I've had a chance to play, or roll and writes, or any and writes, which might as well bring me over to Cartographers Heroes, which as well was a great opportunity to look at that the diversification of flip and rights and roll and rights in this whole genre. Cartographers was my reigning champ for this, and at the convention I got a chance to play Cartographers Heroes, which, yeah, it's more cartographers. So if you liked cartographers, then Cartographers Heroes is a great supplement to your collection. I play with the map packs, so I got to play with like the volcano tile, and that was really cool. I have no idea what's in the other map packs, though they looked really interesting. And the change up through the map pack and the hero really added some interesting new elements. The dragon as an enemy was entirely fierce, and I really loved that there were interesting conditions related to monsters other than just negative points. And because it's a standalone game, I feel good about putting it on here as a game that I'd never played before. I got a chance to play Thrive, which is very much an abstract chess-like game, except for you have these little peg boards that you are going to upgrade your pieces, where all the pieces start essentially as a pawn with a single movement forward. However, when you place your peg down, you can then move in relation to the center peg, your piece immediately hopping like a knight moving in chess to that space, capturing any opposing piece that you land on top of. You upgrade 2 pegs on any of your tiles at the end of your turn after taking your initial movement. So essentially what it is a game where you start with all pawns and then customize what ultimately all of your chess pieces would be able to do. It's a head-to-head abstract dueler, which isn't always my favorite thing. I like those to be either extremely elegant and simple or be much more thematic and much more involved like a modern board game. This kind of straddled a line that made it so it was more academically interesting than it was as like a game that I'd want to play repeatedly. So if you are really into these types of games, then this might be something worth checking out. Personally, it was very interesting to see how it worked, but as far as the fun came from playing it, well, it's not really my thing. While we're on that topic, we might as well talk about Shobu. This is a Smirk and Dagger, or Smirk and Laughter release. I can never remember which of their titles fall under which of their brandings, but nonetheless, this is another abstract game where you have 4 boards and you each have a light side and a dark side, and then there's a rope in between, and you have to take 2 actions on your turn, where one is a passive, I can't interact with you on this board. However, then on an opposite colored board, either on my side or your side, I then get to take an aggressive action where that same relationship of movement, like move 1 stone 1 space forward or move 1 stone diagonally or whatever, can interact with your pieces, hopefully eventually making 1 board of yours have all your stones knocked off, which I think is a much more elegant and much more interesting abstract head-to-head dueler than ultimately Thrive was. Again, this isn't necessarily my style of game, but nonetheless, I did find the puzzle in this one much more engaging and interesting. This was much more in the zone of something that I would turn to. Maybe not own, but if someone was like, yo, you want to throw down on some Shobu? I'd be like, heck yeah, I want to, Shobu. And speaking of head-to-head battlers, I got a chance to play 1 round of Pocket Paragons, which is a head-to-head asymmetric card game where you have a very simple loadout of cards that has kind of a rock, paper, scissors element to it, as certain cards will counter other cards, but it is fully asymmetric. My player has a focus and interest that they want to do. They have their own unique superpower, and it plays very quick. I love the art aesthetic on it. It looks really tight. It played really tight. Immediately, as soon as it was explained to me, I had a good feel for what I was doing, and it made me wonder what the thousands or whatever other player characters that I could have played as would have played like, because the 2 that we played did feel really different, even though essentially we had the same 6 suit cards in our hands and had the same opportunities of a card to play on our turn. It wasn't a must-have, but also it did make a really favorable impression. And I'm going to find a way of linking all this stuff together, because if you like dials, then you're going to like Board Game Tables' new Ghosts of Christmas, a trick-taking game in which you have some of the most beautiful components, all themed to A Christmas Carol, one of my favorite books of all time. Yes, legit, A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens is right up there with Tolkien's works for me. I am that much of a nerd, have read it a ton, but nonetheless, even if that theme weren't on this, it would still be a really solid game. The real interesting part about it, aside from just traditional trick-taking in a beautiful format, is that you have an advanced mode that requires you to announce how many tricks you will win. And you can have a buffer, in which case you can say, okay, I'm going to win 4, possibly 5 tricks. And so long as you win either 4 or 5, then you get 1 point for each. Anything above or below would be 0. Or if you say, I'm going to win exactly 3 tricks and that's it, then you get 2 points for every trick that you ended up winning, or 0 for anything else. You make this bet after you have already distributed the trick cards for the phase, but before you begin playing them, so you have a good feel for what you may or may not be able to do, and it becomes such an interactive game, and you're thinking so much more about what you want to allow pass and what you want to make sure that you succeed or really tank in a cool way. Moving on. Seven Wonders Architects. This was a game that I wanted to make sure that I got a chance to play. It was at one of the demo tables. I played it. It was okay. Like, it's fine. I mean, it has some cool things about it. The drawing from any of the 3 piles that are in front of you, the upgrades, it feels more accessible than Seven Wonders, and it feels a little bit more concise than Seven Wonders, but also it feels a little bit more bland. And Seven Wonders never felt like it was difficult to explain to other players, or it was difficult to play. The act of playing the game wasn't that big of a deal, and I never felt like it needed to be a less complex game. For me, Seven Wonders Duel is still the reigning champion of the Seven Wonders universe. And then there's Genotype, a Mendelian genetics game. This is a worker placement game in which you're trying to get the genome sequence of all of your pea pods. It is a very tight, as in you are desperately scraping for money every second of the game, tight worker placement. And the main thrust of the game is that you're getting these pea pods. They have certain genetic sequences that you need to capture from the dice pool that are rolled. You have the little Punnett squares, which end up being modified throughout the game, which is a cool element. And then the dice go into those respective areas associated with the results of that. Personally, though, I didn't really ever feel like I was in a good groove with the game. Part of that may be that it was the first time that I had played it, but something about the game always felt like it wanted me to be doing something, and I just couldn't figure out what that was. In spite of me actually winning the game that I played, it just never felt like I was in a good groove. So, interesting enough, but certainly not enough that I need to add it to my collection on top of my already 12 worker placement games that I own and a ton more that I still love. Now, I'm also going to knock out Canvas and Kohaku right next to each other because I played them in the demo areas right next to each other, which was great, and I played them with the same groups for the most part as one another, and that was also cool. Now, Canvas is a game with lithographic cards, that little see-through cards, very similar to Mystic Vale, in which you're building this beautiful art display. And it was beautiful and interesting and gimmicky, except for the drafting in it was way more agonizing in order to find the perfect puzzle that's going to result in the 3 cards that will lay together in order to meet the most scoring conditions when you complete one of the 3 paintings that you're ultimately going hand in. So it had this mix of being this really simple, approachable, easy game just to do a quick draft, and that was lovely and kind, and then this really agonizing, oh, this card goes on top of the, oh my god, no, hold on, let me work through the matrix here, oh no, I need to make sure. It just felt like there was a duality to that game that I didn't love, which is a little bit disappointing because that game is so much about its central gimmick and the cool factor of the components. Kohaku is a tile-laying game with fish in a koi pond and is just a really lovely tile-laying game that I would play again and again. The star of it is definitely the components there. You have these see-through acrylic clicky components that have a visual raised element and then recessive elements. That has no gameplay effect, but it sure really looks impressive. And the shuffling of the available things that you can draft from the display and as they move around are really cool. You always take two adjacent items from the display. One is a scoring feature, one is a fish to add to your koi pond. And then the two tiles from the central two spaces, if those ones weren't chosen, then move to the exterior, thereby making different shapes of what can be taken from the center, because you always have to draft two adjacent tiles. And that makes for some impressive and interesting decisions that you're going to end up making, which ultimately is, kind of standard tile laying scoring things. You're going to score based off of colors and things in rows and things in columns and that kind of stuff. But it had an interesting twist. It had a really good visual presence, and it was a very lovely game. Of the two, Canvas or Kohaku all the way. Now for the last two things to talk about. First off is I played a bunch of Star Wars Jabba's Palace, a love letter game. Yeah, it's love letter. It's Jabba's Palace as depicted in the Episode 6, the third Star Wars movie, Return of the Jedi. Numbering becomes so pedantic at this point with Star Wars. But nonetheless, Star Wars, the one that I grew up with, the one that I love. Yes, Return of the Jedi, Jabba's Palace, love letter. It's the love letter that you know and love, but it does have some nice twists about it. Love Letter is a great game. This was a great game. This has bisected the cards amongst two different factions. So you have the rebels and you have Jabba's buddies, posse, gang. And there are game mechanics within, slight variations on the concepts that you would be familiar with within Love Letter that also play off of those. If player has a Jabba's boy at a certain number or less, then they have to discard the card from their hand. Some things work universally. Some things are specific to one faction or another. The more important thing is that the other great twist from Love Letter itself is there are these agendas which change up the end round scoring. So if you're playing with the default one, it's just the default Love Letter, highest number in hand at the end of the round wins. But you could also play with the highest number of each of the factions wins, which just subtly changes how you play the game without really adding any additional complexity. All of it feels familiar if you are into Love Letter, but it has this different theme and it adds this nice, interesting little thing to contend with, which I really like. Also, one of my favorite components of the entire convention is the little award tokens. Instead of the classic Love Letter little cubes, you have little discs with screen printing of Mos Eisley on there, which is just amazing. It looks so great. Or maybe it's Jabba's Palace. I don't know. I don't know Star Wars. And then finally, Kabuto Sumo. This is the game of the con for me, designed by Tony Miller of the Breaking Into Board Games podcast. This is another board game tables joint. It is one of the most charming games that I've ever played. It is a dexterity game where there are a bunch of wooden discs on an elevated platform, and you are just pushing in additional discs for your beetle wrestler to make the other beetle wrestler fall out, or rather, you're just pushing discs to make the other beetle fall out and hoping that in the process you are also making sure your beetle stays in. there's so much subtlety to the game that you don't initially realize until you put in your first disc and suddenly the possibilities open up. And that alone would be really cool, except they're asymmetric powers that are beautiful unions of theme and strategy to add these wonderful components for each of these different beetles and the insects, which I guess are part of an expansion that was simultaneously released. Each of the powers seem powerful and interesting in their own right, from having recovery powers where if your beetle is slightly on the edge, you can get like a bonus boost to get you right back in and have a real powerful push, or being able to cash in certain things in order to be able to make additional attacks. There is such a great unity between thoughtful dexterity mechanics and the thematic implementation in this that it was immediately charming. Games take between 10 to 20 minutes. I played 2 players, 3 players, 4 players, enjoyed it every single time. It was the game that I kept coming back to at the con, playing with adults, and then I even went home, woke up in the morning before going back to the con, told my wife, told my son, yo, you gotta check out this Kabuto Sumo game, and we played it 3 more games before I went back to the con, and everyone that I played it with really loved it. I'm not saying this game's going to be for everyone. There is a slower pace to it than what people typically associate with dexterity games. Some people just don't like dexterity games, period. But if you like dexterity games and you like really thoughtful game mechanics and subtle but really interesting implications for everything that you do, and you like great theme, or you just like some of the finest Kwanchai Moria artwork that you've ever seen, man, this knocked it out of the park. This is S tier. This is the creme de la creme of the convention for me. Easily the game of the con. It's the game that I have so far, since playing it for the first time just a couple days ago, played it 7 times. I liked it that much, and I don't see myself stopping. It is just executing on what it does oh so well. Normally, I'm a strategy gamer type of guy. Mid-complexity Euros are normally my go-to jam, but this is just some of the most interesting, innovative game design that I've seen in ages, and I could see 1,000 possible expansions for this, but even as is, the game is just solid and interesting and fun, and I just want to play it some more. So that's it. Those are my rapid reviews, not so rapid reviews, I guess, of all the games that I played at Platypus Con in 2022. I would love to hear if you played any of these games, your own experience with them, and if you liked this format, because if so, well, I'm vaxxed, I'm boosted. If conventions are happening, then I'm going to intend to hopefully go to them and cover them this year. Venture into the brave world so long as it's safe and reliable to the extent that it can be right now. And if you liked this, then I'll do more then. As always, thanks for watching, thanks for gaming, thanks for supporting. Go out, stay safe, have fun, play some games. I've been Jack for the Cardboard Herald.